Well, I have a few things to address before the class. Some of the management team members and I had some discussions over some of the issues that will be relevant to all of you, so I'd like to address them with all of you here today. The first one is that, as I mentioned before, some of you who are not in class, not working on any staff member, not working on any staff positions, do not have any certificates, but staying here. Not so sure what kinds of status you have, but recently some of the management team members, the relevant supervisors will be here to talk to you, because initially if you are already over the age limit of staying here, and if you're not in class and not have any of those qualifications, you must leave by the end of the year, because this is not a seniors home and this is a Buddhist academy. If you were to continue to stay here like that, you will bring lots of difficulties to Laronggar, and it's probably not good for you either. We need to follow the regulations set up over here in the monastery. Without our consent, yet you wish to buy a property and stay here, and do not listen to anybody's instructions, do not listen to the supervisors and the management team, then they will have to deal with such situations with the appropriate regulations. Sometimes maybe worldly, the worldly management methods. I hope as Buddhists you should stay here practicing the virtuous deeds and not creating any difficulties to Laronggar. Myself, if I were to put myself in your shoes, if I do not qualify the previous qualifications, if I do not have any of the previous qualifications, I would definitely not stay here in Laronggar. I would definitely leave here. So I hope all of you who do not qualify, do not fit into those categories, you have to think of, for example, either study in a class or get into the management system. And if you can't do any of those, then you cannot come to Laronggar ever again if you do not follow those management regulations. You cannot receive empowerments and all of that. You'll be blacklisted, so to speak. So I hope that you would follow the regulations and do what would be the best for everybody. That's the first thing. Second is that the staff members over here, we now have a method to register yourself. So there's a registration form. People from different departments, either working full-time or part-time, you will have to fill those forms so that we can have a HR department and then could find the appropriate department for you to work on. And some of you, if you do not have certain posts, later the Khenpos and Khenmos, after filling those forms, after having those forms filled in, then the positions will be filled according to the different qualifications. In my monastery, in fact, everybody will have to volunteer in certain posts to serve the Sangha, other than, of course, those who have some serious issues. But the majority of them would have to take the rotas to work in different roles, and it's been going on for many years. Some of them probably worked for 10, 20 years, and some people without really good capacity, they don't really contribute. And I think this is really not good. If you were to just stay here and squander the wealth of the entire Sangha, this is really not necessary. If you can have any kinds of staff posts to serve the Sangha with whatever kinds of capacity you have, that would be better. A group of people, I noticed that they do not wish to serve the Sangha at all. Some of them do not have a good character, and some of them do not have a good temper. But I think it's really necessary for everybody to contribute to the Sangha. I think it's really necessary for everyone to serve the Sangha. Otherwise, you need to really scrutinize yourself whether you have pure precepts, whether you truly engage in study and contemplation. Without any of those prerequisites, then if you were to receive and enjoy the gathered wealth of the entire Sangha, I think it would not be very virtuous. Whenever it comes to using the shrine hall, for example, the shrine hall is built by the group effort, all of the Sangha. And if you wish to purify your past obscurations, the best kinds of work for you would be clean the toilet and to maybe adopt some of the janitor work. Many people are chanting Vajrasattva and so on, but I think if such people do not even serve the Sangha, it still would not be that beneficial. Today I had a meeting with the management team, the manager of next year, Khenpo Yishu Phuntsok, and a group of others to discuss about the volunteer positions and staffing positions. We came to this consensus that you need to use for example, your profession or what you're good at to serve the Sangha. Otherwise, if you only stay here and do not serve the Sangha at all, it is really not good. It would be encouraged for you to at least serve Sangha a bit with whatever kinds of capacities you have. That is why this year we asked all of you to fill out a form, and then the HR will analyze the information that you submit in. Also, I would like to make the remark that the change of management team, the in charge is a bit different than before. I think this year we're getting more detailed. I also understand lots of departments really enjoy to have young people, and the young people, however, wish to find a position that is simple and probably not time-consuming, not so tiresome. But I think as a young person, you need to find a position to train yourself, to see whether you have a good foundation as a person, as good character, good endurance. It is not that you have to get into any position with a good practice. And I think you should see those kinds of positions as a way to challenge yourself, to train yourself. Otherwise, if you were to consider yourself as being a wonderful practitioner, but when it comes to maybe working in cleaning and those kinds of general physical work, that is the time to see how your practice is. People nowadays tend to find the easiest, the happiest, the most beneficial work for themselves. But I think that's really selfish. You need to really serve the Sangha. As a Mahayana Buddhist, this is a practice. This is the second thing I would like to address. The third one is that beginning from tomorrow, our class time would not change. However, we will have a pre-class award ceremony. Other than that, other than those people who will be receiving rewards, who will be receiving awards, it is not allowed for everybody to come here and attend that. Again, it's been under lots of restrictions in the past 2 years, and I cannot open up to receive so many people at once. If I were to do that, then various kinds of obstacles may happen, and we may even lose the opportunity of receiving the Dharma teachings. For that reason, after considering many different factors, it is to be only limited to small numbers of people. Those ones who only attended the post-class presentation groups can come here to the shrine hall to receive it. The fourth thing is about the precautions of the fire prevention. It is requested for me to speak of it in class. The fire department asked me to take a further look at the inflammables and combustibles above our shop, as well as the hotels over here. Especially, there are lots of materials that could be toxic and flammable. Those are the places that cannot be allowed to be residents. With that in mind, the relevant staff members need to have some discussions about how to change to different places, or especially our residents over here, should it be changed to different places, or should we maybe replace some of the previous materials that are not qualified to be used. After your discussions, later there will be some of the fire prevention patrols. It is not just here. In fact, I think fire prevention is really important all over the world. If we do not pay attention, if there were to be any fire, then we could have lots of damages. Not just damages. What's really more important is if anyone got hurt, or even if there were any fatal cases, that would be very, very difficult to deal with. That is why I really ask all of you to take this matter seriously. For example, some of the doors, the exits, they were made of iron, they were metal doors. And then at the time of fire, if they were to be locked, if they were to be or if they were to be jammed, how could we escape from the fire route? You need to really think about that, maybe because I'm quite careful about all of that. So I hope when it comes to fire prevention, you would take it seriously, especially the indication light and the fire routes, the exits, and all of that. The male and female Sangha members over here, there are lots of people who I know that you have the professional skills. You work in in this field. So I hope that you can work and staff in this particular field of work. According to the Shurangama Sutra, it says that the 10 directions and the 3 worlds are all of us, and we're already endowed with all kinds of merits, the 1200 merits and qualities. So I'm sure there are some of the professionals who worked in, for example, construction, in architecture, in electricals and hydros and all of that. We definitely need these people to step forward and staff and serve the Sangha with their skills. Living over here, we have quite a bit distance to the large cities. But I'm sure we can develop our management as well as our infrastructure to shorten that distance, shorten that gap. I'm sure it's difficult to find some professionals among the Tibetan Lamas and Jomos, but over here, I'm sure there are some of you who are endowed with those skills. Then can you teach them? Can you train some people with your skills? Can you then staff and serve the Sangha? Look at myself. I've already given you so many supreme pith instructions of Mahāti and given you so much teachings. If you do not even wish to share some of your worldly skills, where is your bodhicitta?
The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it here to receive and uphold it, vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Beginning from today, we will start our class on the teaching of the basket's display. We will have the classes on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesdays. This is our first class. I will first briefly introduce you to this sutra, the basket's display, the Karanda Vyuha Sutra. I will briefly introduce and give you an introduction on this particular teaching, so at the time you would be able to understand this teaching. Also, I will give you the oral transmission while giving you some brief introduction to this sutra. I think it is crucial for you to receive the oral transmission from me. After having the oral transmission, you will definitely have the opportunity to spread the Dharma in the future. The basket's display. This sutra was translated about over 1,000 years ago. Tianshi Cai Devashantika translated around the year 987. But so far, this particular teaching is not spreaded quite far yet. Maybe it will be spreaded further. It was back around the time of Song Taizong and the Emperor Song Taizong, when he gave the order to translate this teaching and translate teachings in the translation centers. Lots of the citizens and the monastics really placed great importance and propagated the teachings like such. However, we don't receive lots of information and historical records of that anymore. Not many of the information are available online either. All I can find is that around 1987, an old lay practitioner, Huang Yanzu, in the American Dharma Center, talked about the merits of the Baskets Display Sutra, where he talked about the story and some of the teachings about the baskets display. But from his particular teaching, it seems like he didn't really read the baskets display sutra either. That's just my feeling. Other than that, I didn't find any of the great masters or masters throughout history had composed any explanation or commentary upon this sutra. Some of the translators, though out of great aspiration, and translated some sutras and shastras. However, after translation, the text would be hidden and being stored in those libraries and not being discovered by people. So for us, we need to place great importance in those sutras and shastras and protect those teachings so that the teachings won't be lost. There are scriptures of this text being discovered in Dunhuang in Mogul's Grove. Around the 90s, a Sanskrit version of the sutra had been discovered as well. It is indeed a very important sutra, but sadly, people had not discovered the great qualities and the wonderful teaching that is included in the sutra. Even the Mahayana Buddhists rarely know this sutra and the qualities of this. For such reason, I would like to give you the teachings on this sutra so that you can generate true faith to this sutra. After having faith, I am sure you will actively propagate this sutra. In the Tibetan area, almost every household would prostrate and supplicate to Avalokiteshvara, and many would chant the mantras of Avalokiteshvara, especially the seniors. Some, actually a lot of the seniors would chant 100 million times of Avalokiteshvara's mantra. Also, the Amitabha's Tantra. In the Weisar area and Ando in Kham area, people place great importance in the Avalokiteshvara's mantra. People would use the Avalokiteshvara's mantra, the Mani mantra, and write them on the prayer wheels and put and chisel the Mani mantra on the rocks and make them into the prayer wheels of different sizes. In fact, on top of this particular prayer wheel, I have a very small prayer wheel that has this particular mantra too. Though many people would chant Namo Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva that saves beings from suffering, there are lots of calling and lots of mantras as such. However, the propagation of such teachings is definitely not enough. That is why some of the Dharma teachers requested me to give some more teachings on the qualities and the reasons of chanting the Avalokiteshvara mantra and practice the Avalokiteshvara practice. so that it could be a good auspicious coincidence to start the Avalokiteshvara practice. But I'm not so sure how many people would be able to give teachings on it and how important or how fruitful my teaching of now would be. Because in the past, in the last few years, we were doing quite well, we were flourishing, and we had more people listening, more people studying the Dharma. I'm not quite sure if it's still going to be the same case. However, if you were to receive a teaching, an oral transmission in your mind stream, you would be planted with this precious seed and a special seed in your mind stream, and then that is very meaningful as well. In the past few years, I've always wanted to give teachings of this particular sutra. This teaching had given by Potsog Rinpoche, and after contemplating that, I had more aspiration and intention to give you these teachings. For such a reason, I will briefly, and not too extensively, not too briefly, to give you the teachings of the Baskets Display Sutra. The Tibetan translation was rather quite early. It was translated by Nanam Ishide from the early propagation period of time. Some scholars also consider that Bharatana translated this. There is, of course, another group of scholars considers that the Kin Songtsam Gampo, as well as Tumi Sambucha, the creator of Tibetan language, Tibetan writings, translated this sutra. Indeed, he translated some sutras. In the later time, King Songtsam Gampo had this collection of the precious teachings of the qualities of money mantra. And it's similar to a terma. Some of the teachings in the collection of the money was in fact quoted from the Baskets Display Sutra. So, taking that into consideration, there must have already been a translation of the Baskets Display into Tibetan language at the time of King Songtsam Gampo. If that is the case, then Bharatana, that lived around the time of King Songtsam Gampo, Tritsong Detsen, that was around 8th or 9th century, stated that this sutra could be translated by Tumi Sambuta. Anyhow, in the Tibetan Tripitaka, there is no discovery of such translation. So we do need to look for it, and if there is another copy of translation. In terms of the Sanskrit version, there is a Sanskrit version that's been discovered, and nowadays it is placed with a great importance. Recently, there is a Japanese translation, there is an English translation that is available, there is a translation into Spanish as well as other different languages. It is said that the most complete version is the Tibetan and the Chinese version. The languages that's been translated to are mostly based on either the Sanskrit or the Tibetan or the Chinese. Though that there are people who place great importance on this sutra, but I think it definitely is not sufficient. The Sanskrit version is currently in collection of the different museums of different countries. There are different copies of the Sanskrit version. For example, in Korea, in America. In Korea, there is the National Library that included the Baskets Display Sutra. In the Chinese language, it was around, that sutra dated from between 1392 to 1910. And there is a preface written by the Emperor Song. I'm not sure if it is also included in the Chinese version. If you also have the preface that's written by this emperor, I think you should also read into that, because it's quite important to see how the emperor back then placed great importance and cherished the sutra. There is a Sanskrit version that's been handwritten in 1687. This particular copy is collected in the American Asian Art Museum, and that copy is written in gold, and it was discovered in Kathmandu. There are different kinds of translations, including Tibetan, Sanskrit, Chinese, and other different languages that spread it in different corners of this world. And all of them has such great importance, historical values to it. Many countries kept record of the ancient copies of the sutra text. So I really hope that the Sangha members over here, whenever you have the possibilities, and if you have the capacity to build museums and libraries and some really important records, information, though maybe simple to our days and time, but it could be quite important historical records for the future generations. It is not important for us to spend our money on food and drinks and decorating our own house. What's important is to preserve the meaningful texts and meaningful artifacts of the religion, of the history, of the culture. Those kinds of heritage would be more important than any of the others. Whenever you have time, I think you should visit museums and exhibitions and look at those historical artifacts, because those even a little artifacts could be quite symbolic and could be extremely meaningful to the human culture and history. On one hand, this sutra had been placed with great importance out of all the literatures and the scriptures of the world. On the other, though that this text had been kept in different places of the world, the teaching had not been spreaded and not been propagated, and that is such a pity. Lots of our ancient texts, teachings, though being copied by silver, by gold, and had been cherished by people of the past. However, the meaning of those texts had not been passed down to generations, and that is quite a shame. For such reason, maybe because of the blessings of Phuntsok Rinpoche, we do place great importance of artifacts. Of course, we can't really say that they're antiques, but we do place great importance of the old texts. All the way since the establishment of Larung Gar since the 80s. On top of that, we also place even greater importance to the sutras, to the text, the meaning of the text. This particular teaching, though it had not been propagated in China, it is mainland China. It is considered as a really important text to the Tibetans. Not many monasteries and not many Buddhist institutes give teachings on it, because through the historical point of view, this sutra is similar to the 42-chapter sutra in the mainland. It already was translated at the very beginning of the propagation of Dharma. As you probably remember, that it was around the 3rd century during the reign of Tibetan king Lhatot Nyentsang. He had received some artifacts that fell from the sky around the Lhasa area. I believe I've wrote about that previously. So during that time, during his reign, he received the artifacts fell from the space, and then those things, in fact, are the place of refuge of the body, speech, and mind of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The one that is the refuge place, or the thing that signified the body, was a Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara's statue, and for speech it was a sutra of 100 verses of confession, and then on top of that, there is the basket's display sutra. The one for mind was a crystal stupa. So those things fell onto the roof of the palace, and then there was the prediction that after 5 dynasties, people would understand the meanings of them. So after 5 dynasties, it was the time of King Songtsang Gampo, and people indeed understood the meaning of the sutras and the teachings. Some historical accounts, according to scholars, stated that these Dharma treasures did not fall from the space. Rather, they were brought over by learned Buddhist scholars, the Panditas from India. And those events described before, such as a fall from space, were simply the folklore stories. However, the Dharma treasures may be bestowed or appear in this world in various ways that far surpass our imagination and our cognition, because those are the incredible blessings from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Because of subtle and profound causes and conditions, the sutras would manifest, would appear. For example, in the Vajrayana, lots of Vajrayana sutras were brought into the human world from the celestial beings, and some of them would fall from space, and some of them from the Naga's palace, and some of them are discovered through the mind terma. There are lots of such phenomena that cannot be explained by scholars. Anyhow, this sutra, though, is not as well spread, considered or compared to the Diamond Sutra or Shurangama Sutra. It's not as well known nor well spreaded. But when we look at the content and look at the blessings, I think you will gain understanding, and you will definitely understand why this sutra is so important. I don't necessarily need to praise this sutra right now. I am not giving you a commercial, so to speak, about this sutra. I am simply giving you this teaching because I think this sutra deserves to be more spread than how it is now. I think the situation for the propagation of this sutra is not ideal, because it is fused with so much powers and blessings. Also, since there is such incredible causes and conditions associated to this particular sutra, it is definitely worth our respect and joy while receiving this teaching, because this sutra was the sutra that has appeared in Tibet when Tibet was still a barbaric place. Now, let us receive the teaching with great happiness, with great respect to listen to this teaching. This is quite necessary. Now, I would like to talk about the Baskets Display Sutra's history, especially in the Chinese history. How and when it appears in China. In the Buddhist history of China, it was translated back in Song Dynasty. As we all know that there were 21 emperors back in Tang Dynasty, out of which only one emperor was a non-believer. Not only he was non-believer, he destroyed Buddha Dharma. The rest of them were Buddhists and propagated Buddha Dharma. After Tang Dynasty, it was Song Dynasty. The second emperor of Song Dynasty translated this sutra. Around that time, this sutra was already translated. That was around 10th century. Around year 980 something. Around that time, Muslim was the dominant power in India, which led to exile of Buddhist monks to various other places, and lots of historical changes were happening. Tian Shizai, the translator who translated the sutra into Chinese language, another name to him was Devashantika, and his possible brother, whose name was Dhanapala, also a well-known translator at the time, came to China at the time. And then the emperor of Song Dynasty wanted to establish a translation center, a sutra translation center. Back around the Tang Dynasty, around 811, there was a very well-known sutra translation center. And around the year 982, the Song Emperor wanted to use that model that was used back in Tang Dynasty and start to translate sutras. It was quite interesting when we look at the translation and the rituals and the buildings that's described about the Sutra Translation Center. It was a white mandala-like structure was built in the center of the translation center, and then on the four corners of the mandala, the Indian monks would be the protectors to the gates. Flowers, incense, and lamps would be offered at the time, and then the monks would prostrate to the mandala and then practice for 7 days and 7 nights. After a great practice like that, the monks would then engage in translation. Also, translation at the time was a group translation. The format of translation back then was a group translation, where one person would read the Sanskrit version, and then the translator Devashantika would read it. The assistants on his left and right would then engage in translation and explanation of the meaning in Sanskrit language. After proofreading for a few times, from his assistants. Then people would start writing it down. And then there are the assistants that mainly would beautify the language or work on the language, and then some would be working on the proofreading and some on editing and so on. There were 8 to 9 rounds of the process, after which there would be a complete sutra will be translated. At that time, the translators or the management of the translation centers imitated some of the models of management from the Tang Dynasty. So Tianxi Cai Devashantika translated, and his translator team translated about 250 sutras, over half of which were Tantrayana teachings, and the other half were Sutrayana. So from the historical point of view, it was indeed quite a big translation center. And after the establishment of the translation center, in the second year, the Baskets Display Sutra was translated, and then the emperor of then also studied this teaching. On top of that, the emperor studied the sutra teachings and cultivated talents such as translation talents and the monastic talents. After the passing of Devashantika, then Dhanapala and other translators were cultivated and continued the translation activity for a period of time. We should truly rejoice to the historical movement of such translation centers, as well as the style of translation. When I made the comparisons of the Tibetan language and the Chinese language translation, I can see that majority of them are quite accurate to each other. I can see how they correspond to each other. But maybe because of the different editions, some of the Tibetan and Chinese can be a little bit different, but the majority of them are indeed quite in accord to each other. When I read Devashantika's translation of the way of the Bodhisattva, I couldn't understand it. And for quite a period of time, I was disappointed in his translation because it was very difficult to understand. But today, when I made the comparisons of the Chinese translation to the Tibetan translation, I feel that it's not that difficult, though that there are some different ways of expression and usage of words. And maybe the Chinese language was more classical and more ancient back then. And maybe because of my advancement in understanding the Chinese language, I feel that the translation is not that difficult. For such reason, I am going to study it with you to mainly study the merits and qualities to the Mani Mantra. After studying the quality of the Mani Mantra, we would be able to generate true faith to this sutra. Within this sutra, there are some qualities associated to the Kundidharani as well. That's quite popular in China mainland. So this time I will be giving you the oral transmission, and then I will give you a brief explanation of the sutra. Let's try to study it this way.
Mahayana Shitang Workut Bagbazama Tokupa Jivsha Tabachimbundo Vambo Tangbo, Vambo Tangbo Tija. Darka Dakatobati Sinap Jondan de Miamio Tanzeti Sarmgome Zevjindi Ganga Ravana Gerlon Yapchak Shetan Jirsum Di Gerlunga Gendan Chembo Dam Shanju Sang Gendan Chembo Rapta Mangbo Tagdang Tab Chig the Tab Chig Bandarka the Shanju Sangwa Chembo Dorje Lochu Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Yishim Tonga Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Dorje De Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Sanre Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Namki Nyambo Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Nyemi Nyambo Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Sunji Maktonga Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Lana Dorje Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Kunda Sanhua Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Mtachin Top Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Jiba number Sera Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Gunda Huava Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Manji De Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Shanyaz Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Lana Dorje Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Jamsu Chang number of Luju Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Chunzan Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Si Shan Chok Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Wunjin Bi La Dang Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Shamba da Tirta Tagla Soba Shanchu Sanhua Chimbo Shivar Namjiang Tsokso
As I said, the baskets display sutra was translated by Tianshi Cai Devashantika from North India. He translated this sutra under the request of the emperor, being requested by an emperor to make a translation of this sutra. We can see how precious and how important this sutra is. Now let's look at part 1. It says, thus have I heard. One time the Bhagavat was staying with a great Sangha of 1,250 bhikshus and a multitude of bodhisattvas at Jetagrove in Shravasti. Also a great numbers of the bodhisattva mahasattvas. For example, the Vajramati. The Bodhisattva Mahasattva in Tibetan is Changchu Sanghua Sanghua Chimbo. I hear some of the female practitioners sound has a very high pitch, but they would sing it very loud too. Now you know that Shangchu Sanghua Sanghua Chimbo is Bodhisattva Mahasattva. There are Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, including Vajramati Bodhisattva, and then Jnana Darshana Bodhisattva, and Vajrasena Bodhisattva, Gyurgupta, Akshagarbha, and so on. We don't need to read all of the names of the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas. In the Tibetan translation, there is also the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Maitreya. There were 80 kotis of the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, and in the English translation, it's 800 million Bodhisattva Mahasattvas. Those are the great Bodhisattva Mahasattvas gathered there. Samchir Tsagni di Lhirte Bor Nam Jang Tsoso, Yang Lhir de Samchir Tsagsam di Lhir Nam Tsogde, Lhiva Wangshik Chembo, Nima, Dava, Lunga La,
气啦老说吧，力不得的老说吧，他几个做的表现，力王不等，曾把门几就都不讲说。就然后就他这里就是讲了很多这个天人啊。
And then lots of classes of devas also were gathered there.
就是天人的话，就是有哪些呢？就是
Who are they then?
这个天子。
The 32 classes of devas had also gathered there. The principal ones being
就是那个
Maheshvara and Narayana.
这个是咱们当中是他们两个位数的，就是32个。
In the Tibetan translation, it says that the principal ones being Maheshvara and Narayana. And then Shakra, who's the Lord of Devas, Brahma, who is the Lord of the Saha world, Chandra, Aditya, Vayu, Varuna, and other deities were also assembled there. This is such a great gathering. We can see that it's gathered with the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas and then the Devas. Maybe some of the Hinayana practitioners as well, maybe 1,000 or so bhikshus and Ananda. Not sure if Ananda is there. Lama Sodong, who was the attendant of Phontsok Rinpoche, used to say that the retinues of the gurus are just like mandalas on the outer, inner, and then the extra inner layers of the retinues. They're just like the rims of the mandalas. For the same reason, there must be different circles of mandala-like retinues of Shakyamuni Buddha as well, and Ananda may not be there.
Nil Gao Dang, Hli Gerpo Vasi, Rigi Vedang, Hli Gerpo Madruba Dang, Hli Gerpo Yamson Changdang, Der Tava Laso Ba, Hli Gerpo Gerton Toma Tagjiang Cheso, 就是这个是应该就是刚才那个
Those were the Naga kings, the many hundreds of thousands of Naga kings, such as Naga King Udapala, Ilapatra, Timungira, Gavampati, and so on. Lots of the Naga kings. The Naga kings, some of whom would protect the palaces of the human realm. That is why we would sculpt lots of the Naga or the dragon's sculpture on the sides of the palaces or on the sides of the shrine halls. It is so that the Nagas would protect the palace. Some of the Nagas are in charge of rainfalls, some in charge of the waters, such as rivers and lakes. If the Naga kings are unhappy with the people there, then they could create tsunami and flooding. There are Naga kings that protect the treasures. For example, certain mining areas, mining fields, lots of the treasures would be hidden there. On top of that, there are different Naga kings that uphold different shapes of faces as well. And the Naga kings have different levels too. The Naga kings presented at this assembly are the ones of high authority. The audience to the Baskets Display Sutra teaching must be quite magnificent. I'm not sure if there are any Naga kings or devas over here today. I can't see. Maybe there are. often we would say that at the time of having sutra teachings, though we cannot see by our eyes, there must be the Naga kings and the devas present to study the teachings. So I'm sure you're there. Let's study together then. The next part are the Gandharva kings.
知自己不也懂得嘛？得讲错吧的，知自己不你样的解不懂，知自己不也得讲为样的，知自己不乐吧懂啊的，知自己不露出进步的，知自己不什么什么的，知自己不念着这吧的，知自己不研究变吧的，知自己不用的啊的，知自己不乐吧什么的，怎么的，知自己不干的，知对了，说吧，知自己不也懂得嘛？
The previous parts are the names of the Gandharva kings. The Gandharvas are the devas seeking for fragrance. Or the spirits seeking for the fragrance. So over here there are the Gandharva king Dundubishara, and then the Manojashvara, and so on and so forth. There are also the spirits of playing music. They can be considered as the entertainment team or the bands to the devas. The people that would dance and sing. What are the names that cheers for the basketball teams? Right, cheerleaders. So they are the cheerleaders to King Indra, but they're all kings. We shouldn't speak ill of them, otherwise they wouldn't be happy since they're listening. Let's give them some really good examples. Cheerleaders. Kings of cheerleaders. The Gandharva kings also were there in the audience of listening to the sutra teaching given by Shakyamuni Buddha. And then Kimnaras. 저 야동도 만들다때 먹음지 결부 현상다 먹음지 결부 조번잔다 먹음지 결부 사리전다 먹음지 결부 랍다 가와다 먹음지 결부 쿨로 고바다 먹음지 결부 매동도로다 먹음지 결부 노르다 먹음지 결부 시보 쇼르다 시쇼르다 먹음지 결부 존집단다 먹음지 결부 신던타다 먹음지 결부 진자와다 먹음지 결부 샹론다 데르타와 라소바 미금지 결부 결동도마 딱장 속소就是刚才 The above were the names of the Kimnaras, Kimnara kings. They are the spirits of songs. They would sing songs to the devas. Sometimes it is called also the non-humans. Sometimes they would appear with horns on their head. It looks like human, but would uphold various kinds of images. We can see those images in Thangka paintings as well. The Kimnara kings, sometimes their clothing and their particular signs would be their names. For example, at the times of making the fire offerings, we would make offerings to the Naga kings, the Kimnara kings, and the Gandharas. There are lots of fire offerings and the practices that makes offers to them, which could be very helpful so that they would not harm the sentient beings, rather they would create favorable conditions to the sentient beings. All the Kimnara kings are also of the level of kings. They're not the ministers or cabinets, but they're the kings. And then let's look at the next part, the Apasharas. I believe there are many of them. I think there are lots of female audience to this sutra. It feels like such. Maybe we have more female here too. Those were the many hundreds of thousands of Apasharas had gathered over there to listen to the Dharma teaching. The Apasharas named adornment Apasharas, and then the golden belted Apasharas, and then the beautifully adorned Apasharas. So all of those beautiful Apasharas. Other than that, there were many hundreds of thousands of female Nagas.
刚才是赖义无母，知道吗？现在是乐义无母，就是赖是天人的意思，乐是这个龙的意思。然后下面就乐义无母要知道嘛，大家错的，乐义无母言真就晓得，乐义无母不能打就晓得，乐义无母让瓦生巴就晓得，乐义无母三日人就晓得，乐义无母节日花就晓得，乐义无母六个木就晓得，乐义无母。我是一边念一边就是念传承啊，就是这样的话就可以。后来以后我六个国际学啊，后来以后我30级学啊，后来以后我600级学啊，后来以后我1000级学。你看这里有些是有100。
This female Naga has 100 retinues.
它这里百卷龙女，这都是百卷，就100个卷数的龙女。然后后来我们1000级学啊，后来我们特级学啊，后来我们国际级学，还有一个叫做一头那个艺术龙。
And then this female Naga named of one head Naga, 100 armed Naga, female Naga. They seem to be rather strange. No, I shouldn't say that. They're really beautiful.
Arnam Ngarji Shawa, Lay Womo Digi Shawa, Lay Womo Chulak Gaji Shawa, Lay Womo Dipshit Shawa, Lay Womo Zundi Shawa.
It seems that in the devas, there are the devas named as diligent, which also is a name to the female Naga. Maybe some of the translations are different to the Chinese translation. By now we've introduced all the female Nagas, including the ones with the wondrous upholder female Naga and the harmonious appearance female Naga, the victorious, auspicious female Naga, and so on, all the way to the Marishri female Naga. There were many hundreds of thousands also gathered over there. Now the female Gandharvas previously were the Gandharva kings, and now these are the female Gandharvas. Maybe they are the concubines of the kings. Previously, we looked at the Naga kings and then the female Nagas. So maybe the male were here and female were here too. The kings brought their retinues, maybe. The names of the female Gandharvas are all associated to flowers, garlands. Maybe it's similar to the Midolamo, which is a Tibetan name of flower lamo, a flower deva. But men don't usually use middle flower as their name. Lots of the female Gandharvas' names are associated to hundreds of flowers, flowers adorned. In the Tibetan language, it's a drum. Her name is Drum. Maybe sound of drum. Maybe her voice is rather quite deep.
Paris to Vajisha, Trizi Umur number Yabajisha, Trizi Umu Metok Pami Horjisha, Trizi Umu Metok Pami Amujisha, Trizi Umu, what to trigger Chenda Pony Tadon. Trizi Umu Leon Zimajisha, Trizi Umu Chave Umbo Jendan Roajisha, Trizi Umu Sajisha, Trizi Umu Dreva Jinjisha, Trizi Umu Sanke and Rujisha, Trizi Umu Metok Kumatajisha, Trizi Umu Yagajisha, Trizi Umu Jinjisha, Trizi Umu Li Sijisha, Trizi Umu Zogajisha, Trizi Umu Nyangan de Gajisha, Trizi Umu Rensin Nikajisha, Trizi Umu Wambu Harjisha, Trizi Umu Tirki Wamu Damoji Unishawa, Trizi Umu Rataki Yarbu Tianjisha, Trizi Umu Huarndabjisha, Trizi Umu Bari Semojisha, Trizi Umu Dochale Yons Torajisha, Trizi Umu Jerdan Leons Torajisha, Trizi Umu Tamule Yons Torajisha. Trizi Umu Kurchuma Jisha, Trizi Umu Rumbochi Tigijisha, Trizi Umu Yugunwa Dan Roajisha, Trizi Umu Megojisha, Trizi Umu Da Chibi Gujisha, Trizi Umu Nima Mujisha, Trizi Umu Sirstar Nawajisha, Trizi Umu Kurji Yonsu Kurajisha, Trizi Umu Chogajisha, Trizi Umu Tambi Huarjisha, the Estavala Soba, Trizi Umu Gapchaktama Shung.
There are lots of interesting names to the female Gandharas. The names meaning loving facial expression or facial appearance Gandharas and loving generosity Gandharas. Maybe the female Gandharas have more free time. That's why they showed up to the teaching. The last female Gandhara's name is the enjoyment of virtue Gandhara. They were there to listen to the teachings, and then came Nara females.
Magamchi umo jivshawa tang, magamchi umo yile shungwa jivshawa tang, magamchi umo rdongo shik jivshawa tang, magamchi umo chi shik jivshawa tang, magamchi umo namkik zang jivshawa tang, magamchi umo nyobi shik jivshawa tang, magamchi umo magamchi umo hwarzhin jivshawa tang, magamchi umo magamchi umo zangmo jivshawa tang, magamchi umo yogoyin hwar jivshawa tang, magamchi umo kamlak gawa jivshawa magamchi umo barwalak gawa jivshawa magamchi umo shinda hwar jivshawa magamchi umo rumbo chimjongni jivshawa magamchi shenrik zikti hwar jivshawa magamchi umo tonjen jivshawa magamchi umo tanjen jivshawa magamchi umo dorje katsir jivshawa 有个叫金刚圈，就是有些女性当中也有叫金刚圈，不知道他们你们叫那个基隆男女。magamchi umo sertya jivshawa magamchi umo genrab genba genrab genba jivshawa magamchi umo hwarlag yimjin jivshawa magamchi umo ngiba yongsu tenba jivshawa magamchi umo lojo chimmo jivshawa magamchi umo khachong jivshawa magamchi umo 고파 gerbu wang jivshawa magamchi umo signa nor jivshawa magamchi umo nor nzin jivshawa magamchi umo nor barwa jivshawa哇那个基那罗女是更多了 magamchi umo 就是keba ten jivshawa magamchi umo dhamma jivshawa magamchi umo chebjin jivshawa magamchi umo tebjin shikban zu yongsu kyungma jivshawa magamchi umo chuji yongsu chungwa jivshawa magamchi umo kambig do ringa jivshawa magamchi umo kachik jura jivshawa jura jivshawa magamchi umo shtagda chulin bar ndo jivshawa magamchi umo shtagda tisir tonma jivshawa magamchi umo yimjin jivshawa magamchi umo nabar tarshi jivshawa magamchi umo yopa mamchukba jivshawa magamchi umo gyonzin jivshawa magamchi umo rachun barwa jivshawa magamchi umo salan ro jivshawa magamchi umo lhawam changwa jivshawa magamchi umo lhama inge wangmo jivshawa magamchi umo nori wangmo jivshawa tang magamchi umo zot jivshawa ribzot jivshawa magamchi umo jindan jivshawa magamchi umo mangbu ne jivshawa magamchi umo langchang jivshawa magamchi umo gengi genba jivshawa magamchi umo yinchuk jivshawa ter taba lasokba magamchi umo gyab chak toma tak dyang tsokso jo gantai niga jila lo nya.
That was the names of the many hundreds of thousands of female Kinnaras, all the way from the Kinnara named Manasa and Manasi, and then Vahyuviga, all the way to the female Kinnaras named Manohara, and so on. They were also there. And then there were many hundreds of thousands of upasakas and upasikas had also gathered there. Lots of the female and male lay practitioners, and hundreds of thousands of tirtikas, mendicants, renunciants, had also gathered there. So there are the Buddhist lay practitioners as well as the monastics. On top of that, there are lots of the non-Buddhists that upholds
different views. The renunciates over here particularly refers to Nirgranthas, the one with no possessions, or in Tibetan means the naked ones. Specifically refers to the Jains, the ones of Jainist practitioners. There are a few different names to it. Various of the people that uphold the different views. So at the time of the Buddha giving the baskets display teaching, he was giving the teachings not only to the Buddhists but to the non-Buddhists, to the heretics as well. People with a different faith can also receive this teaching. Whenever we have the opportunity, we can give the teachings to the ones that had not taken refuge yet. So this is the introduction to the assembly. Next class we will talk about the true sutra.